5% of people think. 10% of people think they think. And the other 85% would rather die than think. The New York Public Library stands as a symbol of America's most significant public institution. Each nation possesses a foundation. America's is education, as represented by the vast knowledge contained within the New York Public Library. As a determining factor in our lives, education will dictate not only what we learn and the depth of our learning, but often how we will go on to apply that knowledge in the rest of our lives. Having personally experienced education's positive influence, I wish to teach other students what I have learned. How to delve deeper than simply the facts. I wish to impart the art of critical thinking. Over the years, critical thinking has become largely neglected by many of our colleges and universities, a problem which must be addressed. In addition to its necessity on a practical level, critical thinking also provides a unique opportunity for Christians to address secular arguments on an intellectual, truth-seeking level. To paraphrase a definition provided by a research project commonly referred to as the Delphi Report, critical thinking is the act of interpreting and analyzing a message, then drawing a judgment about it, for which one can give a sound, reasoned explanation. According to many scholars, including Dr. Michael Scriven, a distinguished writer, researcher, and the former president of the American National Research Association, quote, "Training in critical thinking should be the primary task of education," unquote. The greatest pitfall any school or system can fall into is seeking to teach its students what to think instead of how to think. Unfortunately, our education often fails in many ways in this regard. In a 1990 Education Summit, the National Education Goal Panel noted a significant need for a, quote, "increased proportion of college graduates who possess an advanced ability to think critically, communicate effectively, and solve problems," unquote. Almost a decade later, the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing completed a study which showed that despite the 89% of college and university professors who claimed that critical thinking was a vital goal of their institution, only 19% could explain what they meant by critical thinking, and only 9% actually taught critical thinking in their class. The magnitude of this problem cannot be understated. A dynamic global competition, a rapidly adapting technological age, and our democratic way of life all require citizens who possess the ability to analyze and respond efficiently to societal issues. Another significant problem raised by a lack of critical thinking is the inability to nurture the concept that one's most treasured beliefs might be flawed. For numerous years, philosophers have attempted to disprove the ontological argument of St. Anselm of Canterbury, a syllogism which logically proves the existence of God. After years of studying the syllogism, one such philosopher, Bertrand Russell, finally concluded that the ontological argument was sound. But he was ultimately incapable of accepting such a profound attack upon his beliefs, and chose to disregard the syllogism, noting that, quote, "The argument does not, to a modern mind, appear very convincing, but it is easier to feel convinced that it must be fallacious than it is to find out precisely where the fallacy lies," unquote. Russell almost arrived at the truth, only to be crippled by his inability to accept the opposing viewpoint. As we similarly scour the shelves of education in the New York Public Library, we'll find messages and arguments that do not coincide with ours. We shouldn't disregard the knowledge we encounter simply because we are not willing to adapt our beliefs in our search for the truth. Fortunately, the lack of critical thinking in the education system reaches out into the realm of opportunity. One of the most significant ways Christians can have an impact on their society is to enter both the secular and the non-secular arenas of education and use them as the springboard to communicate to our intellectual society in a manner that it can understand, through critical thinking. My greatest desire is to have an impact on the people I encounter, and hopefully, through the classroom, teach other students to analyze their beliefs and delve beyond an argument's face value, whether they encounter this argument while researching for a paper in the New York Public Library or at home during a dinner table conversation. However, I can only do this if I first have a strong foundation myself. I desire to go to the King's College because the focus of this college is to teach its students to analyze their beliefs and find the reasons behind their opinions and learn how to communicate their rationale to the people they will encounter. Through a challenging education at the King's College, I hope to become not one of the 85% of people who'd rather die than think, nor part of the 10% who think they think, but one of the 5% who do think and will go on to teach others how to think. Thank you.
You said something interesting about critical thinking, including the necessity of self-criticism.
Yes.
Do you think that education alone is sufficient to teach self-criticism?
I think it's probably a vital place to begin. I know when I first got tossed into critical thinking, it was actually in an online class where we were starting to be forced to ask questions. And then from there I entered speech and debate where we were asking even more questions. So I think a lot of it begins, it can be utilized further through education. It really begins, I think, 12 or 13, where you really hit that stage of life where you start asking lots of questions. And sometimes I feel like our education tends to squelch the asking of questions, like there's only one answer, don't ask questions, just memorize your exams and get an A. So education is often used to further that. But yes, it should stem beyond education. It should be found in the family. Like my mother has always encouraged us to ask questions, to think about reasons, and it should definitely be found in the church. Because I've noticed sometimes Christians, especially in churches, they fail to address issues that matter in the society. So primarily in education, but definitely it should be strongly founded in the church and in the home, because those are both vital places to find it.
And if I may ask, what's your educational background?
It was rather a mix. I was homeschooled till I was 12, and then at 12 my mother put me in the Veritas Press Scholars Online Academy, and I've taken numerous classes from them until this past year. And so mixed up online and online and homeschooled. And then 2 years ago, my mother put me in the NCFCA Speech and Debate organization. So I participated in speech and debate for 2 to 3 years. So.
Cool. What do you think you're what career field do you think you're really going to?
I'm hoping education.
Yeah.
A lot of it could vary. I know God's gifted me in speaking and wanting to communicate. And I also feel very passionate that in whatever field I go into, I want to train whoever I'm encountering to question and think. So I'm hoping education, because one of the classes my online classes was Omnibus, where we read books and then analyzed them from a textual point of view, a cultural point of view, and then a biblical point of view. And that was so instrumental in my development that I've always wanted to go into something like that and teach other people how to do that.
You made an interesting comment about how our demographics here in the U.S. demand logical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Can you expound more on that?
Well, that's probably touching on the practical aspect of critical thinking. Sometimes I don't want to harp only of critical thinking Christians must learn how to think, because there's also a practical aspect to it. When you go out into a business or workplace, you're going to be hitting problems coming up just practically in the place you're working. And part of that comes into me being able to analyze reasons, to go beyond just the face value and say, well, how can I prove this? What's a dynamic approach no one else has ever considered? How can I take my business to the next level? And as we're getting increased competition internationally, with let's say China, even just within America, we need college graduates and workers who just don't accept things and want to stick with the status quo, but who are constantly analyzing, asking questions, and trying to take their business and company to the next level, which requires critical thinking and sort of an active go-getter mind, as opposed to just accepting the facts and not trying to improve.
Do you guys have? Thank you.
Thanks.